The Raven's Call. Chapter 1. The Cryptic Letter. Detective Eldridge's Journal, 19th December, 1898. At 6:15 in the morning, I should have been at home, at Marylebone, at the breakfast table by the warm hearth in our dining room, surrounded by the beautiful portraits of my dear wife Fanny. And instead I was here, at the cold and dreary Wandsworth prison. Though I had witnessed this abhorrence regularly for some 20 years, this time it felt different. The prisoner was a young woman, a foreigner from France, not more than 18 years of age. Her crime had indeed been a grievous one. She had taken up employment at an affluent elderly man's abode. During my investigation, I discovered the demeaning and patronizing pattern of behavior that the old man had exerted over all of his servants for years. He had compelled them to sleep in appalling conditions in the stifling, filthy cellar of his house, in their own excrement. He only permitted them to eat the scraps of food left over from his meals. He had whipped their hands if he spotted a dusty surface that wasn't properly cleaned. He paid them poor wages and sometimes nothing at all for working ungodly hours. Yes, he was guilty of cruelty, of being inhumane. But did his actions warrant so brutal a murder, one which would send shockwaves across the country? No, it did not warrant murder. Josephine Dupont had systematically poisoned her employer with arsenic. The doctors had failed to ascertain the cause of the old man's declining health. According to his neighbors, he had lost nearly 3 stone in a short span of time. His skin yellowed, his eyes sunk into their sockets. He was on his deathbed. He would have died as it is. But no, it wasn't enough for Josephine, who had been subjected to the old man's harshness. She decided to exact her revenge barbarically. An axe was used, and that's all I would like to recall, for now. And yet, when Josephine was brought to the execution shed, her hands tied, her hair disheveled, dressed in a dark, ragged dress, she glanced at me. That glance said it all. She had indeed confessed her crime. She had repented it. But of course, an example had to be set. In that one glance, I saw regret, guilt, and sheer pain. I wanted to scream at her and say, Why did you do it, Josephine? And yet I could not. I could feel my hands dampen with perspiration. My heart palpitated. She was so young. She could have been my daughter. She was taken to the gallows, made to stand on the trapdoor, her face covered by a brown cloth and the noose tightened around her slender neck. At exactly 6:30, the executioner released the trap and Josephine fell several feet below, her neck breaking instantly. I clenched my fists. I had a lump in my throat. I wanted to vomit. Yes, I should be accustomed to all this, and yet I had almost vomited when I witnessed the dismembered state in which I found Mr. Lockwood, her employer. And I almost vomited when I saw this 18-year-old young woman who had travelled all the way from France to seek employment, transported to hell, it seemed. The murder she had committed was not justified, but in a way, neither was her punishment. It was too much for me to digest. I tried to divert my mind from the malignant spectacle I had just witnessed. I thought of the many Christmases that were spent chasing thieves, murderers, and conspirators in the remotest regions of England, and how Fanny had been furious with me for leaving her during the festive season. She often asked me to retire early from Scotland Yard. She begged me to switch occupations. She thought that I would do well as a lecturer, as I was fond of explaining my cases in detail to her. She thought I was an eloquent orator. I always chuckled at the thought, but poor Fanny was very serious. She often wondered what my final case would involve. What would be that climactic moment when I would indefinitely extricate myself from Scotland Yard? I sighed. As I exited Wandsworth Prison, the gas lamps across the street flickered in the dark, casting ghostly shadows, and snowflakes began to fall, making the atmosphere ever more airy. The odd carriage trotted by. It was still far too early, and the entire population of London was not yet awake and about. Suddenly, out of nowhere it seemed, from amidst the fog and smog, a postboy came dashing to me. Mr. Eldridge, letter for you, sir. I normally only receive telegrams from Sergeant Humphrey on matters of urgency, and that is what I assumed this letter was. As the boy in tattered clothing handed me the letter, which was in a very coarse envelope, I saw the young lad's black and rough hands carrying his sack of mail, which I assumed was heavier than him, given his frail physique and tender age. Indeed, my morning had been a sorrowful one as it was, and this was merely exacerbated by seeing this poor child. But without exhibiting my pity towards him, I took out a sixpence from my coat pocket and gave it to him. Thank you for your trouble, little one. Keep yourself warm, will you? He looked at the sixpence with bewilderment, then thanked me several times before dashing off into the grey, dense fog, disappearing in it like a ghost. It was bitterly cold. I stopped a hansom cab and directed the driver to take me home, for I was taking some time off work. Inside the hansom, I rubbed my hands and blew into them to resuscitate the warmth that had died from the intense chill. I looked at the coarse envelope intently, for something did not feel right. It certainly was the ugliest envelope I had ever seen. It was crumpled, and the off-white texture had yellow stains on it and dirty fingerprints which did not seem to be the postboy's, but that of an adult's. I carefully opened it and found a note, a most peculiar and puzzling one. The paper was torn from both sides, and unlike the envelope, it was white without stains. The ink was black, yet a little smudged. The note smelt of some sort of cologne. It read, Detective Eldridge, I have heard you are an astute detective. I have read about you in the papers. Yet a man of your reputation has failed to investigate the disappearance of Mr. Hugh Percival of Griffinvale House in Kent. He disappeared from his residence some 3 months ago. I demand an explanation. I want you to investigate this matter immediately. What an odd note, to say the least. There was no signature at the bottom of it. There was no address provided on the envelope. The handwriting was somewhat awkward. It did not seem like an educated person's hand, for most educated people write in italics. And yet there were no grammatical errors. It was, for all intents and purposes, an enigma. I cudgelled my brains over the names Hugh Percival and Griffinvale House, but nothing came to mind. In all my years as a detective, I had travelled far and wide within England and beyond, and indeed I had been to Kent occasionally. Yet I was not privy to this name nor the residence. It certainly sounded more of a threat than a plea for help. It was greatly perplexing. I instructed the cab driver to take me to Scotland Yard. I had to show the letter to the Chief Inspector immediately. Chief Inspector Richards was a quiet and intelligent man. I had worked with him for some 20 years, and in all these years I had borne witness to his unequivocal allegiance to the police. I remember the days, not that long ago now, when he was actively involved in the Jack the Ripper case. Though he was not chief inspector at the time, he worked assiduously and indefatigably towards solving the mystery, which the entirety of Scotland Yard, including myself, were ultimately unable to unravel. You could tell simply by entering his chamber that it was the stronghold of a senior police official. The wall behind him was covered in names of suspects, and at the centre hung a map of Whitechapel. Very odd indeed, Detective Eldridge. Did the postboy say anything to you about who may have given him the note? I removed my hat and placed it on the Chief Inspector's desk, then responded. No, Chief Inspector. I did not inquire about the origin of the envelope. In all honesty, I thought it was a telegram from Sergeant Humphrey. What I find most peculiar is that whomsoever sent the note knew exactly where I'd be this morning. Most of the letters I receive are here at Scotland Yard. The strangest thing of all is the authoritative tone of the note, not to mention the baffling handwriting. And why would they send me the note of all people? Why not a local superintendent? Oh, yes, precisely, Detective Eldridge, the sheer audacity. But you are famous, we all know that. Your credentials are known. The Ripper case, the London Dockyards case, where you successfully rescued nearly 15 children who would have been sold into prostitution. You caught the murderer of the famous parliamentarian Frederick Russell, and now the Josephine DuPont case. You have created quite a reputation for yourself. Quite right, Chief Inspector, but most people recognize my name and not my face. This boy knew exactly who I was. Or perhaps he was instructed by somebody who does recognize you, Detective. Well, you do know about Griffinvale House, do you not? I shook my head. Home of Colonel William Burton. He died some years ago. Some said that he had lost his mind. Well, now, his daughter, her name escapes my mind, was married. I read that in the papers when Colonel Burton died, but I do not know his name. Perhaps Hugh Percival is her husband. I fell into deep contemplation, and the Chief Inspector had to jolt me out of it. Are you with me, Detective Eldridge? Chief Inspector Richards, if Hugh Percival had actually disappeared 3 months ago, why did his wife or other family members not inform the police? Why did we not read about it in any of the papers? This note could be a hoax and nothing more. Now, be that as it may, Detective Eldridge, I'd like you to write to the family at Griffinvale House and investigate the matter. Just to be on the safe side, that is. I don't think it's a good idea to visit the house unannounced. Write to them first. I also agree with you. It may be a hoax, but it is better not to leave any stone unturned. I nodded, and as I was about to take my leave, the Chief Inspector beckoned to me to sit down again and looked at me gloomily. You are taking time off from work, are you not, Detective? Yes, Chief Inspector. This morning's, will you know. Was it smooth sailing this morning? It's done, but it felt quite different this time. How so? She was young. She was subjected to cruelty by the old man. She was wrong to have murdered him, Chief Inspector, no doubt, but she was provoked into doing so. I agree with you, Detective Eldridge, but the law is the law. You know that we cannot let anybody get away with cold-blooded murder now, can we? But what about justice? Let's just say Mr. Lockwood got his just deserts for treating all his servants brutally for years, Detective Eldridge, and Josephine DuPont got hers for murdering the old man. The arsenic poisoning was enough. She could have left his employment, but no, she had to kill the man with malice aforethought. Chief Inspector Richards paused. Changing the subject, I reassured him that I would keep him informed about the Griffinvale case. Just as I was leaving his chamber, he suddenly called out to me. Ah yes, I now remember her name. Colonel William Burton's daughter. It was Emmeline. What a beauty she was, I have to say. I remember seeing her at a ball some years ago. A mild-mannered and docile woman. Well, I mustn't keep you from your duties, Detective Eldridge. I'll let you get on with your inquiries.